Hello everyone, I hope you are well and welcome to these pre-session materials that will go through a variety of really important issues, concepts, pieces of information in preparation for the session that I will deliver practically with you in just under a couple of weeks. So the purpose of this session is to explore the importance of the visual system and really introduce this concept to you. It's just so we can get everyone on the same page. So when it comes to the actual practical session, there are not as many questions in regards to this stuff, and we can really concentrate on the practical application and the actual doing when I come down to deliver to you. So during the next half hour or so, we're going to go through the visual system. We're going to go through vision, the difference between vision and eyesight, explore the importance of the eyes, an intro to eye tracking, which is one of the main things that you're going to be doing during the session, and also introduce the importance of the brain and how this influences decision making as we go moving forward. Before we move on to any intricate details, we're going to play a little game, and that game is Where is Wally? So this is Wally on the screen here, good looking chap, and what we're going to do is try and find him in a picture that includes a variety of different things going on on the screen, but you don't really need to pay attention all that much to that. All you need to do is find this guy. So what I would recommend you do, I'm going to flip onto the picture now so you can find him. But what I would recommend you do is pause the recording so you can look at the picture, and then as soon as you have found him, you can press play again and continue with the presentation. So here's the picture. Remember to press pause. So hopefully you found him. And now I'm going to go through the process that likely happened. At the start, I gave you a piece of information. I showed you a picture of Wally, and it is most likely that you identified the fact that he wears red and white horizontal stripes on his jumper. So what likely happened was that you went round the screen and you started to identify those elements, because there are lots of them on this screen. Now, what happened then typically was you started to pay a lot of spatial attention. So you zoomed into the red and white stripy bits, but then you zoomed out a little to see if the rest of it matched. Did he have the glasses? Did he have the hat? Did it look like him? So then you're dotting around the screen here and trying to find the pieces of information that you need. And hopefully you found Wally, which was there in the bottom left-hand corner. So during this picture, there is lots and lots of things going on. There's chicken being roasted on the fire. There's people eating spaghetti. There's potatoes being thrown. There's all kinds of different bits going on. There's lots and lots of things on this picture that can distract you. But it's really important that we understand what has just happened during this picture. So let's unpack that. So what's just happened there? It's a great depiction or a great example of the difference between eyesight and vision. Eyesight was the clarity in which you were able to see that picture. How clearly could you see that picture with your eyes, and you were able to scan around the pieces of information on that screen, and ultimately how clearly you can see what is going on within that picture. Vision, on the other hand, is the interpretation of what you're seeing. So you are going round the screen trying to find Wally. Your eyesight is seeing it clearly, but it is actually your brain. This is your vision, so your vision happens all in your brain, is your interpretation of what's going on. So you're looking for these red and white stripy bits, but then it's your interpretation, it's your brain that's telling you, actually, that is not Wally. That's not what I need. I need to move on to the next piece of information. So it is actually really important to differentiate between the two. Eyesight is just how clearly you see things, how clearly you see this screen right now. But vision is ultimately what the interpretation of it, and all happens in the brain. So in the top left-hand corner here of the screen, this is something you should be relatively familiar with if you've gone for eye tests. So you'll be asked to look at it's called a Snellen chart. You'll be asked to look at the chart, and you go down to the lowest or the smallest letters that you possibly can at a rate of 20 yards or at a distance of 20 yards. So that is what optometrist tests when you go for these eye tests, and that is eyesight. They're testing your eyesight. They're not testing your vision per se. So this is a really, really important point to make, because seeing is not always seeing. And what I mean by this is you can look at something, but if you don't have the memory, the knowledge, the interpretation, the information in your brain to be able to do something with that information, you can look at it all you want, but you won't be able to do anything with it. So where does that apply in cricket? If you're a batter, for example, you can look at a bowler, and if you haven't really learned about that bowler, about what they do, you may not actually be using your vision and using your brain as well as it possibly can do. So you potentially are performing at 70% right now. What we're trying to do is get you to 80s and 90s, 95s, all the way up as much as possible, so we can engage that brain even more. So hopefully you're hooked with the situation. You're hooked with the information. You're interested in what we are about to do and what we're about to uncover during this session and the practical. I thought I'd just give you a brief introduction as to who I am, who you're actually listening to right now. So I'm Lee Waters. I have been teaching, coaching, being an applied practitioner for over 20 years now, in further education, higher education, in a variety of different settings too, from applied perspective: ice hockey, cricket, taekwondo, water polo, athletics, a variety of different settings. And it's been a really, really humbling journey to be on, to work with both beginners and international athletes. It may surprise you to hear that actually I was an anti-academic, and what I mean by that is I didn't get on all that well at school, and the reason I didn't was because I didn't understand the application of what was being discussed. Now I've used that in my practice, and I've used that thing that used to really hinder me and try to make everything that I do as applied as possible for whoever I work with. Because we can talk about all these nice fluffy ideas, we can talk about all these nice theories and all of this kind of stuff, but if it doesn't actually work for you and you don't understand how it works, then there's actually no point in going through it. So hopefully by the end of this session and the practical session, you will have a clear idea as to how your visual system works, and ultimately how we're going to move forward and train it and go through that process. So that is why ultimately, rather than this just being all online, is that we actually are doing a practical session face to face, of which I'm really, really looking forward to do. The next few slides are opportunity to see how your brain works and give you insight into how your brain works. So once again, as with the Where's Wally picture, I encourage you to just press pause and look at the picture and see what you see what you interpret. So I'm going to ask you now, what do you see in this picture? Now press pause to make sure that you can spend some time looking at it. Okay, so hopefully you can see two ladies in this picture. There is a younger lady and there is an older lady. Now, if you can bear with me, you may be looking at it and going, absolutely not, I can't see that whatsoever. So in the bottom of the screen here, we have the chin, we have the mouth, we have the nose moving up into the mid part of the picture, and then we have an eye and a hair and a bonnet and a bit of a scarf for the older lady. Now for the younger lady, what we have is we've got a nose, we've got an eyelash here, we've got the outline of the face, we've got the cheek, we've got the chin, we've got the jaw. That's the ear now, not the eye, which was what for the older lady. Hair, still the same, bit of a feather, and move down into the bonnet, into the scarf. But there are two pictures here. There are two ladies, an older lady and a younger lady. Now reflect on, can you see both, or whether you can only just see one or the other? And now that you've had it pointed out to you, can you now see both? Just reflect on that. Moving on into the next picture, we also have two things going on. So as with the last, press pause and have a look and see what you can see. Now, two things going on. There's a kind of Mexican scene going on, and the only reason why I say it's Mexican is because the gentleman on the horse is wearing a sombrero. So if we go down to the bottom right of the picture, we can see that someone is laying down, covered by a blanket, a yellow blanket, next to a riverbed, moving up to the top of the screen, under the arch of a bridge. So there's a river going through a bridge. On the riverbank, going down the left-hand side to the middle of the screen, we can now see a gentleman that's riding a horse, and it's a white horse. Now, flip that, and now the gentleman that's riding the horse, his elbow is now the nose of a face that's actually looking towards the "What do you see" letters. The river is now hair of that gentleman. The riverbank is now a forehead of that gentleman. And the horse is now a moustache. Can you see that? Once again, reflect on whether you can see both or just one of them. Same process. Look at this picture. Pause. What do you see? Now, I'm going to let you into a secret here. There is nothing going on in particular in this picture that you need to know about in terms of there's no hidden faces, there's no switching of faces, there's no going from scene to a face or anything like that. So why would I get you to look at this picture and ask you to interpret what you see? Some people look at this picture and just see a wood. Some people look at this picture and start thinking, I wouldn't really want to walk through there because it looks a bit eerie. Looks a bit something like from a horror film or something like that. Other people that are quite deep and might be philosophical, they may be looking at this and going, this is like a path of someone's life, but it's uncertain because there's fog at the end of the path. Now I know that's quite deep, but once again, it's all down to interpretation. But the other ones were, right? We were all being presented with the same pieces of information, and I guarantee you, across the board, some people would be able to see what we were talking about, and some people wouldn't. Some people would still struggle once we have highlighted it, but once again, we are seeing the same piece of information, or we're at least looking at the same piece of information. But it depends on our interpretation, it depends on our brain functioning, it also depends on how we see things. Okay, once again, all happening in the brain. So you can see it as clearly as you want, but if you're not interpreting, you're not using the brain, then actually sometimes there is potentially a bit of a disconnect. So keep that in mind as we move forward throughout this session. I've got you to play Where's Wally, interpret whether there is a young lady or an old lady, look at a Mexican scene, and also take a wander through a woods metaphorically. What on earth am I going on about? How does this apply to sport? Let's go into that, shall we? So decision making is the most important cognitive process we go through. We go through so many of them throughout our day. Think about how many you've already gone through right now. You are literally making one now as to whether to continue listening to me or not. Obviously, I'm hoping that you're going to continue listening to me, and hopefully it's going to be useful for you. But in order to be consistent, effective, and accurate in our decision making, we need information. And more importantly, we need to be able to filter that information into what is relevant or important and what is irrelevant or unimportant. And upwards of 90% of that information comes through our eyes, it comes through our visual system, and it is really important that we understand the processes that you take with your visual system to pick up information or not. Now, I've just told you how important decision making is from a cognitive perspective, the brain. I've also just told you how important the visual system or the eyes are to that process. Up until this session, how much focus have you started to place on the eyes? Do you specifically train them? Do you train them in any shape or form? Do you focus on them in any way during training sessions or separate training sessions? More often than not, I come across teams, and I've worked with pro athletes from beginners all the way through to Olympic athletes. More often than not, they say no. But they acknowledge that the visual system is important. And hopefully, having this conversation with you is something that will help you change or help you do this even more, should you already be doing it. But compare this to speed training. Just give you a comparison. It's quite well accepted that speed is really important in sport, whether that be running between the wickets, whether that be running after a ball, that kind of thing. So to improve your speed, quite happily do some speed sessions, or you'll isolate your hamstrings, you will go to the gym potentially, do some squats. But that's well regarded, that's well accepted. Speed's important, but so is decision making, and so is the visual system and the eyes. So let's start paying them some attention, or at least more attention than currently focused on. Going further, decisions or decision making are a big factor into why we are successful or not. Think of situations in which you have considered yourself to have achieved your goals, you've been successful, and consider those situations where ultimately you have fallen just short, or you consider yourself to have not been successful or failed. They are a great way in understanding how far we have come, especially if you've gone through the process of tracking where you were when you started a certain training program, especially in this regard. But what are they? What are decisions? They are a complex process that involves the selection of an action or series of actions based on a given situation. Now that's just a clear definition of what decisions are. And once again, I'm not trying to be too simple here, or I'm not trying to be detrimental towards your intelligence or not anything. It's just to make sure that we are aware of what decisions are and we are on the same page. But how do we make decisions? And ultimately, there are a number of key processes that need to be considered. Decision making is often discussed. It's often discussed and it doesn't always cover the processes highlighted now on the slide. So the eyes, we've discussed how important they are in you scanning the situation that you're in. Do you have the information? Do you not? Do you recognize it? Do you not? All of these kind of important pieces of information. The filtering, very, very important. The visual system, once again, do you have the knowledge? Do you have the memories? Have you built that up through time? Have you faced situations before? Have you faced this bowler before? Or are you aware of what this batter would like to do? These are stored memories. They're useful as long as you have what's called encoded, you remember them correctly, and they're accessible. And we'll discuss that more so in the practical session. A gaze behavior is just a fancy term to say of where you move your eyes to. You move them left, you move them right, you move them up, you move them down, you move them diagonally. Gaze behavior is broken down into what's called saccades. So what I've just described, moving your eyes left, right, up, down, it's the fastest movement in the human body, and it is ultimately dictated, guided, and caused by the 6 skeletal muscles that are around each eye. And this is what we're going to try and train during the practical session as well. I've mentioned memory and knowledge multiple times, and I can't stress enough how important those aspects are. So if your drill or your activity is not building effective memories and knowledge, then we need to make sure that it does have other clear aims and outcomes. And if we're talking about decisions, it would be very, very remiss. It would be very, very foolish not to talk about emotions. Emotions have a significant role to play in our ability to make consistent, effective, and accurate decisions. So that is something we're going to talk about a little bit later on in this, and especially during the day in the practical. Once again, let's consider this concept of being faced with the same piece of information, but if we were all in the same room together, I guarantee you there would be multiple interpretations of it and multiple performance levels within it. What does that look like? We're going to have a look at something called a concentration grid. A concentration grid consists of 99 numbers going from 00, which is your start point, which I'll let you know now is in the bottom right hand corner, all the way up to 99. Your objective, or what you are required to do, is to go from 00 and finding 01, find 02, find 03, find 04, in between all the other numbers that are in this grid. So there's lots of relevant pieces of information and there's lots of irrelevant pieces of information on this grid that you need to be aware of. You only have 1 minute in order to get to the highest number that you can. So as soon as you hit 1 minute, you stop, and whatever number you are on at that point, that is the number you have achieved. So I'm going to flick onto the concentration grid, which is going to pop up on the right hand side, and then I would like you to pause this recording and time for a minute and try and get to the highest number that you possibly can. Remember, you are going from 00, which is in the bottom right hand corner, to then 01, find 02, find 04, sorry, from 03, find 04, find 05, etc. and off you go. Okay, so it's going to pop up, pause the video and time for a minute to see which way you get to. So I hope that was interesting for you, and I hope you didn't get too frustrated either. So I'm just going to ask you a question now. Did you absolutely, or were you absolutely certain that the number that you were looking for at any point was not in the grid? So say you were looking for 05, for example, you were saying to yourself, 05's not here. At least kind of stitch me up here. 0, 5. Oh, there's 0, 5 right in the middle of the grid. That kind of thing. Did that ever happen to anyone? Be very, very interested to see. So we've all been presented with the same grid here, and I'd be really interested to see when we meet up to see what numbers people got to. But I would like you to try this again, and I would like you to change the visual strategy that you used the first time. So what I mean by that is some people may have looked at this grid and gone along the rows, so from left to right, and just searched each row to see if they could find the number that they were looking for. Some people may have gone down the columns, so from top to bottom. Some people may have gone from bottom to top. Some people split the grid into different ways, so in half or into quadrants, and just scan those areas. And others, actually, there's an interesting way of looking at it, is if they are on the 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3 part of it, they will look for the zeros and then see if that 0, whatever number it is the one that they need next. But then they remember where it is next time. No, sorry, remember where that is. So say if you find 0, 8 in the bottom left-hand corner, you don't need 0, 8 until you've already found the numbers before it. But then you remember 0, 8's there, and then you're now trying to find 0, 9. So try and change the strategy. So go for another minute and see how you get on. Once again, just pause the video and time for a minute. Now, did you notice anything about your second attempt? Did you find it easier to go through those first initial stages? So you already knew where 0, 0 was 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. You already knew where that is. So you built up a slight memory. So you already knew the path in which you needed to go. Did emotions ever play a point? I mentioned before about, did you just find a number that you couldn't find, so you started to get a little bit frustrated? Did that ever happen? And then what happened at that point with you? Did you start to get tense? Did you start to get angry? What happened? Did you notice anything with your visual system? Be very interested to see. And then which visual strategy did you prefer? Once again, something to consider as we go through. Although this is not necessarily a definitive training tool, because its applicability is very limited into the real world, it is a very, very nice way to try and understand your processing, to try and understand your ability to filter information, and also it's a really nice introduction concept to the point of the visual system. So once again, I hope it's been useful for you. And this is something that you can try time and time again to see if you can get better. Make the grid up yourself, and also change where the numbers are. Maybe something you want to try. Now, I've mentioned visual skills. I've mentioned that they are vital in order to make decisions. And if we are to make decisions, we need information, etc., etc. But let's break that down a little bit further, because we have clear visual skills, or what we could call core visual skills, that can all be trained. Now, some of these have quite fancy names. Now, all you need to know, I'll break it down into its simplest point. Dynamic visual acuity really sounds quite fancy. However, all it means is being able to see things on the move. Now think about that in cricket. There's quite a lot of moving parts. The bowler, for example, they are moving towards you. They are moving towards you. Therefore, you need to be able to see them while they're moving. You need to be able to know the point of release. You need to be able to see the ball at some point during when it's coming down the wicket. We'll have discussions about what we're actually meant to do from a visual perspective. Do you track the ball? What do you notice about from the bowler? We'll discuss that further on the day. And we'll also find out from it from the eye tracker. But at this present moment in time, just be aware that there is a skill that you can develop that enables you to be able to see things that are moving and if you are on the move. Focusing. Are you able to go from near to far? Are you able to focus on something that is near to you and then far away, and then vice versa, something that's far away and then something that's close? If you're watching this on a laptop right now, do it. See what you get, how good you are. Focus on the center of the eye where the X marks the spot, and then instantly look up and look at the furthest part away from the room that you are in now. How did you do? What was your focus like? Were you able to focus really, really quickly? Now think about how important that is in the world of cricket. If you're in the slip, or if you're a wicket keeper or something like that, something's from a relative distance away, and then all of a sudden it's quickly on you and you need to be able to react. Are you able to judge distances? That's what depth perception means. Your ability to accurately and to judge distances. Do your eyes target the relevant stimuli even when fatigued? And this is something that is really, really important and is often forgotten. People often do their tests, often do their eye testing when they are in a rested state. They're not fatigued, so they think everything is fine, everything is hunky-dory. Actually, there could be times where it is missed that actually our eyes do not work in tandem, they do not work together, and that means that actually we are not aiming correctly. So it could mean if you're throwing the ball at the wicket, or if you are bowling, or if you are targeting in terms of with a bat trying to hit the ball, all fundamental things, massive things within the world of cricket. Actually, when you get fatigued, if we are not aware of it, this could be hampering your performance. Are you able to see your surroundings? So you have a central point that you are looking at. How far does your peripheral vision extend to? And eye tracking, something that we're going to do a lot of during the practical session. But all of these skills, and I keep saying skills, and it's to reiterate the fact that skill by definition is something that can be developed, trained and worked on. And we can do all of that with all of these skills. And that is really, really exciting, and that is really, really empowering. But I'm very well aware now that you may be asking the question, why? And that is the purpose of this session. That is the purpose of the practical session, and hopefully many sessions to come in the future. So how are we going to do this? We're going to do this predominantly through something called eye tracking. Eye tracking gives us the ability to see exactly what you are looking at, in what order, how long for, and if you are taking in information or not. This on the screen is a couple of depictions of the original eye trackers, and believe it or not, it actually physically touched the eyeball, and when your eyeball moved, it would move a cursor on a piece of paper or diagram or whatever they were trying to look at, and trying to work out what the participant was looking at. I can't imagine that was really, really nice to physically touch the eyeball. Eye tracking has significantly developed since then. When I first got into eye tracking, you had to wear a backpack with a laptop in. So you had eye trackers, so you had the glasses on your face, obviously. That was then connected to a laptop, which was then in a backpack. But it was more mobile than the half room sized thing that you've just seen. However, this did prove problematic when you started to get into dynamic situations. So if you were having to change direction quickly, for example, the laptop would then shift its weight, and then that would mean that the participant that was wearing it would then have to fight the backpack, and it became an unnatural movement. And what we're trying to do here is to make sure that we are assessing your natural behaviors as much as possible. So anything that makes it unnatural, we want to keep to a minimum. And wearing a big backpack on your back was actually a big hindrance. So it was a really, really good thing when we started to get a lot more streamlined with the eye tracker, which is what we are going to be using. So the one in the bottom right hand corner is actually the one that we're going to be using. The black bands that are on the forehead and on the head, that is something different. That's what's called an EEG piece of equipment, and we won't be using that because EEG needs quiet and it needs you to be still at this present moment in time. But that effectively measures our brain waves and effectively starts to understand specifically when we become stressed in what's called alpha and beta waves. So spend your time focusing, please, on the glasses that the lady is wearing. We have 8 cameras on each individual lens. They focus on the eye. The eye is lit up through infrared, perfectly safe, by the way. There's a camera facing out. It sends through Wi-Fi to a device, so a laptop, a mobile phone, a tablet, the 2 pieces of information, and then we're able to watch live what the individual is looking at. I've mentioned saccades. So mentioned saccades before as being the fastest movement in the human body, and all it is the movement of the eye, left, right, up, down, and diagonally. Fixations are the pieces of information that we stay on for more than 100 milliseconds, and we are able to see what people are interested in, the order, and also the effect emotions have on our visual system. So what does that look like? Let's go into the world of Taekwondo and see it here. So the cursor on the video now is where this person is looking. These are two Great Britain prospects for Taekwondo, or they were at the time, and we were trying to ascertain the difference between, or we're trying to work out the difference between an attacking Taekwondo player and a defensive Taekwondo player. Now what we look at here is the person that we're viewing. He's actually what's considered to be a defensive Taekwondo player, and what I mean by that actually is that, can you see that this cursor is moving up and down and analyzing his opponent, trying to understand where his opponent's going to go, trying to understand what they're potentially going to do so he can counter move. You'll notice that the other person is also wearing an eye tracker. He was very different. He was actually eyes on the prize. He was actually looking very much at the bib that they are wearing, at the vest that they are wearing, and that was because he had his eyes on that area so he could make contact with it, and that was his target. That person scored a lot of points. However, he conceded a lot too, because he wasn't necessarily judging where his opponent was going, and he wasn't really defensive in that sense. So it was really, really interesting to see the 2 different approaches here, and that's just one insightful thing from eye tracking. Now, here we are now on board with a horse rider. So you'll start to notice, and you'll start to hear a little bit of sound here, that the eye tracker records sound too. So what I'm trying to work out here with some GB Equestrian riders is how they use their visual system whilst going round a show jumping course. Do they check the jump early? Do they not? Where do they focus on when they're leading up to the fence? Now there's been multiple things that have been done by the riders. Some focus on the top rung of the fence, and as soon as they get their stride right, they then move past the fence with their eyes and focus on the next. Others only focus on the center of the top of the fence until they have cleared it. Others actually go to the bottom of the fence, jump it with their eyes, and then jump it with the horse. So there are various strategies here that can be employed. But what the point is, though,
Oh
with
boy.
using this approach is to try and make sure that the best approach is being used for you. And what's really coming out of the different settings that I'm working in is that, okay, there are some generic things that can be used in training and generic things that can be said about certain things. However, it does very much come down to an individual person as to what they do. It's like an individual fingerprint, if you were. We all use our eyes in slightly different ways, and that typically links back to the memories and knowledge. If we have a memory or a piece of knowledge about a certain piece of information that we need to have from an experience that we've had, that's where they're going to focus. But if you haven't had that experience, you wouldn't think of focusing there. So it's really interesting working with these athletes to try and understand those intricacies. Here we have a quick session in rugby. Rugby works as well. So as you can see, the eye tracker is very versatile. It can work in dynamic situations. It can work in applied settings, no problems whatsoever. It can take a little hit. It's quite durable, and it is very easily fitted to these settings. Let's go into cricket, obviously, because that's the sport that we are more focused with. We When I have two available, we can do it from both angles here. So we can look at it from the perspective of the bowler, and we can also look at it from the perspective of the batter. So we can see how they are both playing off one another in a way, and we're able to start to gain information as to what is going on from the visual perspective. I always find this clip really interesting because it really demonstrates the concept of feedback. So you are viewing the first, third, and sixth ball of an over. Now the difference here is after the first ball, let me back up. The batter had not faced this bowler before. So they had never faced this bowler and they didn't know what to expect from them. Can you relate to that? I'm sure you can. Now, if we roll this back and go back to watch it again, notice how different the visual behavior is from the first till the last. Now, the first one is quite erratic. Now, what happened in between the first and the third was that I was able to show this individual, so I stopped the recording and was able to show the individual live, well, not live because they'd just done it, very quickly, what they were doing and asking them why they were going or why were they approaching it in that certain way. So that gave them really insight or real good insight into what they were currently doing, and actually the way in which they were approaching it was they were trying to look at everything rather than trying to narrow down the important pieces of information. So as you will notice, I'll play it one final time, is that as you will notice here, they are very, very scattered. They're looking quite all over the place. They're not quite sure, and they were open about this, they weren't quite sure where to look. So they ended up not really looking anywhere. Now compare this to this approach here. Much more structured, much more structured. And once again, I intervened, gave them some information, gave them saw what they were doing, and then notice the last one, how structured it was. Now, we don't want to be too structured, obviously, because if we are too structured and too rigid, we may miss information. However, we also don't want to have what could be termed a scattergun approach and trying to look at everything. Because if you try and look at everything, the ironic thing is here is that you will actually take in less information. So we need to be clear as to what they're doing and why they're doing it. So final bits really before I sign off here. We need to mention about the stress process, and this typically is something that we all go through, and it's something we all experience, and people experience it to different levels. We all appraise situations, we all see situations, we all interpret situations, and it is purely our interpretation of the situation as to whether we begin to have a stress response or not. If we care about the situation, if we feel like we're not skillful enough to be able to deal with the situation, this is where we are likely to have a stress response. Hopefully though, we will go through a process over this practical session and ones in the future to try and go through this appraisal element, and we will go through this period of what's known as acceptance. We will accept the situations for what it is, and this has been shown multiple times to be a very beneficial way of accepting the situation. It calms you down, it has a positive effect on the visual system, and actually what will be really, really good is to not get this stress response, which has really negative, profound effects on decision making and the visual system. If we are relying purely on active coping, so what I mean by active coping, if we're relying purely on the likes of self-talk, on imagery and things like that, we are using that as a kind of a last stop or a last ditch attempt to try and gain some control. If we hit it at its source, where our thought processes are, we're more likely to be able to perform more consistently and effectively. But hopefully what we will do, like I say, over multiple sessions is, as a sub-level, would be to address that. But why is that important? That's because it affects this orange part of the brain here. And it's what's called the prefrontal cortex, or the lobe, if you would like to know. But all you need to know is that being stressed affects the front part of the brain, which really is the decision-making center of the brain. And it can have such a big impact on our decision-making ability. It gives upwards of potentially 20 seconds of stress that reduces our ability to make effective decisions. So the smaller we can make that number, the absolute better, because that will really, really have a profound effect. How can we categorically say that it is working? We measure cognitive load. So things like this. So here we are on board with a cricket umpire during an international match. The bar in the top of the screen is there what's called cognitive load, and that is the amount that the brain is having to work to pick up the information and go through. What we want is quick peaks, but then peaks coming straight back down again, because that means that the brain has seen the information, interpreted the information, and is not stressed. If there are consistent peaks, it means two things. It means one of two things. One, that person is stressed, or there are multiple things going on in that situation that need to be addressed. I've obviously worked in the world of ice hockey. That's being worked in with the World Championships during World Championship games. So we're actually doing it for the equivalent of World Cups. I will be going to Romania next month actually to use it with the world men's to use it with all the ice hockey officials and go through that process. And obviously I've already shown you from a show jumping perspective. Here we come to the end of the session. So my aim here was to introduce the visual system, the importance of it, highlight the difference between vision and eyesight, explore the importance of the eyes when it comes to decision making, obviously unpack what decision making is, and give an intro into what we're going to do in terms of eye tracking when it comes to the session. The idea being for the session is that each individual will have at least some time with the eye tracker on, so they'll be able to face a number of balls, a minimum of 1 over. That will give us some information as to how they deal with bowling or being facing balls. There's a variety of different scenarios that we're discussing, so it'll be interesting to see what happens during the session. The eye tracking is not the only thing that's going on though. We're also going to be doing other things, from visual exercises to using something called occlusion, visual occlusion glasses and things like that. So really genuinely looking forward to it, and I hope this session hasn't been boring for you, and I really hope that it's got you really interested in what we're about to do, because this is something that is not done consistently. And what I mean by that is that there are not many people doing it, and it's not because it's not good. It's because that it's just simply because teams aren't doing it yet. This will be the next big thing. This will be something that will be part of or ingrained into training. So the fact that you're sampling it now in your early careers is just incredible. So I'm really, really looking forward to teaching you. Really, really looking forward to our session, and I really look forward to meeting you in person. Have fun.